The Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was controversial because it employed many agricultural technologies, including genetic modification or selective breeding, pesticides and herbicides, and crop specialization that had profound effects on society, the economy, and the environment, both positive and negative. Despite the negative effects of the Green Revolution, the positives that resulted outweighed the negatives, ultimately meaning the Green Revolution was necessary and instrumental in the economic, social, and agricultural progression that led to the current state of affairs. As an introduction, what was the Green Revolution and what caused it? According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Green Revolution was the great increase in production of food grains, namely wheat and rice, beginning in the mid-20th century. The causes include famine in developing nations, the aftermath of World War II, and the state of the Cold War at the time. The purpose of the Green Revolution was to alleviate hunger and poverty in developing nations by increasing agricultural production. Efforts from the U.S. came in the form of exporting agricultural technology to equip developing nations with the resources to help themselves. After World War II and the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, agriculture became an instrument of global power as the U.S. tried to counter communism in the Cold War. In 1946, President Truman warned about a coming famine of half the world, and in his 1949 inaugural address, he said that, in order to stop the spread of communism, America was prepared to transfer its technology, especially agricultural technology, to hungry countries around the world. This series of scientific and educational efforts is collectively known as the Green Revolution. As mentioned before, the technologies employed during this period include crop specialization, genetic modification or selective breeding, and pesticides and herbicides. Because the goal of the Green Revolution was to alleviate hunger, only about 10 crop varieties were mass-produced due to their high-yielding properties, ultimately affecting the biodiversity of every region in which these crop varieties became popular to produce. To further influence these high-yielding crop varieties, scientists isolated and propagated a dwarfing gene in plants, resulting in a high-yielding, high-density crop. Lastly, pesticides and herbicides developed for specific plant varieties became widely used by farmers to increase yield without compromising plant health. All of these technologies were introduced to various regions around the globe, but had varying effects by region. In India, and Asia as a whole, excessive use of chemicals influenced soil depletion and water contamination. Because farmers weren't educated on how to properly dispose of these chemicals, their health was negatively impacted. Daniel Pepper writes of Punjabi villagers claiming cancer and other ailments are on the rise since the implementation of pesticides and herbicides. Mexico, as well as India, experienced success growing high-yielding varieties of crops. The Rockefeller Foundation launched a project in Mexico to alleviate hunger, and because Mexico had the means to carry out cultivation, or in other words, they had arable land and proper climate, it experienced agricultural prosperity. Unlike Asia and Mexico, Africa's land wasn't suited for cultivation of the specific high-yielding varieties, so the agricultural technologies of the Green Revolution couldn't be utilized. Even though this was the case, Africa is still in need of some sort of Green Revolution in the near future in order to sustain its population. Some of the aforementioned environmental and health effects included water contamination and soil depletion due to excessive chemical use, and the declining health of farmers who didn't properly dispose of said chemicals. Because farming in general isn't necessarily good for the environment, scientists made efforts to considerably improve agricultural productivity and use available land more efficiently by developing pest-resistant and fast-growing crop varieties. Despite the struggles that accompanied these new agricultural technologies, society as a whole experienced great progression in establishing an economy, decreasing hunger and poverty, and creating the social hierarchy that we saw develop into today's social structure. Because poor farmers couldn't afford fertilizers and pesticides, they often reaped lower crop yields and were forced to increase their prices or risk going out of business. Contrarily, growing high-yielding grains in developing countries was cost-effective and allowed for large-scale production. Feudalism formed as a result of farmers who couldn't afford pesticides, and the division of labor formed social hierarchies. Large-scale crop production and wholesale linked towns and cities to promote an interconnected market. As a result, corporations could monopolize these production methods and interconnectivity to increase global power. This led to an emerging economy like the one we have today. Now, was the Green Revolution worth it? If the agricultural technologies of the Green Revolution hadn't been introduced to foreign or developing countries, Many of the foods that are considered staples around the world, namely rice, wheat, and other grains, might not be as such nowadays. The resulting interconnectedness between countries and continents helped to establish societal and global markets that are now the basis of the global economy. Now, the concluding question for you all is, based on this information, do you think the Green Revolution was worth it? And if not, what do you think would have occurred instead, if anything, and what would society look like now? Thank you.